Hi friends, welcome to Raising Lifelong Learners. I'm your host, Colleen Kessler, and this is the podcast where I encourage you to trust yourself and your differently wired kiddos as you help cultivate their curiosity, encourage them to discover the world around them, embrace who they are wired to be, all while helping them discover their passions, interests, and raise them to become the amazing adults they're meant to be. Hey, welcome back. This is episode 201. I'm so glad you're here. We are going to be talking all about impulsivity today, impulsivity in our kids. Now, as parents, especially homeschooling parents of neurodivergent kiddos, I am sure we all know all about impulsivity from a behavioral standpoint, right? We see impulsive behaviors in our kids all the time when we're homeschooling neurodivergent kids. But we're going to talk today about, first, what some of those behaviors look like, what impulsivity kind of is, how it shows itself, and how we can differentiate a little bit between impulsive behaviors and chosen behaviors. And then we're going to talk about what we can do as homeschooling parents to help our kids manage their impulsivity. But before we get started with this episode, a quick shout out to CTC Math. Thank you again for being our sponsor. We are so grateful to you. I am grateful as a homeschool parent because CTC makes my life a heck of a lot easier in my homeschool. I can check math off. That box is done every day. And so I'm grateful for them, for their product, and for their support of our content. All right, this is going to be a good one. Pop your earbuds in. Go for a walk, tackle the dishes, do some laundry, or just close yourself in a room and listen, because this is going to give you some great suggestions for helping your kiddos with impulsivity. Let's get on with today's episode. Hey there. Okay, let's talk about impulsivity a little bit today, because neurodivergent children are often impulsive. And it's important for us as parents, especially homeschooling parents, to kind of tease out where the impulsivity is coming from, how we can manage it and help our kids manage it, and what is kind of causing it, and then how we can help our kids advocate for themselves and just hone in on maybe some of their triggers or what kinds of things are going on under the surface. So first, what are we talking about when we talk about impulsivity? We're talking about struggles when it comes to thinking through actions before doing things. We're talking about kiddos and adults, frankly, because some of these impulsive behaviors you don't really grow out of when you are neurodivergent. But we're talking about individuals who struggle with executive function. They may have difficulty processing cognitively the things that they need to do. They might struggle with thinking through a clear path of action before doing something, decision-making, self-regulation skills when it comes to their emotions or how they're processing the world around them. And all of these things tie into their decision-making. Our neurodivergent kids struggle when it comes to planning, when it comes to their working memory skills, remembering what they're doing or whether they came into a room or whatever. And then their need to seek novelty might turn them into kind of that poke the bear personality where they disrupt whomever is in the room because they forgot what they went in there for in the first place. And so they're just going to figure out something to do. Kids who struggle with impulse control come by it naturally. We've talked about this before on the podcast, right? Apples don't fall far from trees. And so if you struggled with a specific challenge like ADHD, or if you or someone in the family has an autism spectrum disorder, or those kinds of executive dysfunction, those kinds of things, then it's likely one or more of your children will too. Kids who have sensory processing differences can also struggle with impulse control because the stimulation from around them, the external stimuli that's affecting their input or their output, can overwhelm them to the point where they have outbursts or they behave explosively or impulsively to cope with the intense feelings of overwhelm that they get from being in a situation that is sensorially overwhelming. Impulsivity can happen as a result of all sorts of neurodivergencies. And so we as families who are homeschooling neurodivergent kids experience impulsivity in our home at a higher rate than neurotypical families. And so it's kind of a challenge to homeschool when you're often or constantly disrupted by whatever impulse control issues are happening in your home. So what are some of the things that we can do as parents when it comes to homeschooling these kiddos? Well, I think that one of the most important things we can do first is we can think about whether the behaviors that we're struggling with, the behaviors that we're seeing are coming from impulsive behaviors, right? It's impulsivity that's causing these challenges, or if they're coming from intentional actions. I hear that all the time, right? How do I know if this is ADHD? How do I know if this is just behavioral choice? And the answer isn't always cut and dry. It's hard to tease that out because you can't always separate the challenges, right, from the behaviors. But here are some things that we can look for as parents of highly impulsive kids when we're with them all the time. We can look for acting without thinking. A neurodivergent kiddo with impulsivity often engages in behaviors and actions without considering the consequences. They interrupt, they blurt out answers or their thoughts, even when it's inappropriate. They engage in impulsive choices and risks and, oh gosh, all sorts of things. I can remember my kids climbing the walls at co-op, literally climbing the walls, like ratcheting their legs between door jambs and climbing up, or shimmying up the corner of a wall so they could jump down at somebody coming through the hallway. These kinds of impulsive things are things that kids do without thinking about the possible actions. They just do it without considering anything that would happen as a result of what they are doing. That's likely impulsivity. They may have difficulty waiting or taking turns. Impulsivity often manifests as a struggle with patience or waiting. And neurodivergent kiddos might exhibit this impatience in all sorts of settings, like waiting in line, taking their turn in a game, waiting for instructions in their co-op class. They may have poor impulse control. Kids with impulsivity have a difficulty controlling their immediate impulses. They might grab things without permission, speak out of turn, engage in those risky behaviors without considering the potential dangers. They may be restless and fidgety. Impulsivity is often accompanied by a restlessness and a constant need for movement. And neurodivergent children, they might have difficulty sitting still for an extended period of time. And so it might look like they're squirming or they have excessive movement, even when it's not appropriate or necessary. These things all stem from impulsivity and the neurodivergencies that are accompanied by impulsivity, like ADHD and autism spectrum. In fact, I, who have ADHD, have a difficult time doing anything while sitting completely still. If you're a member of the Learners Lab, you've seen this firsthand. And if you're not, join us because it's a fun place to be. But when I teach a live lesson to kids or when I'm doing a Q&A, a group coaching session with parents, I'm constantly moving in my seat. I adjust, I fidget, I move. I even have fidget toys like little koosh balls and squishies at my desk so I can have something fiddling in my hand. As I'm recording this podcast, I'm moving my chair. I'm trying really hard not to so the mic doesn't pick it up, but I move my chair back and forth. And it's difficult for me to do anything without some kind of movement. When I drive long distances, actually, even when I drive short distances, I am constantly readjusting myself in my seat. It's really, really difficult for me to sit still. And I know our kids who are impulsive struggle with this as well. When kids are impulsive, they often have challenges with regulating their speech. I've already talked about interrupting conversation, speaking out of turn, but it also leads to volume control issues, tone of voice, the content of what they're saying. They also have difficulty with transition. So those impulsive behaviors can be triggered during transitions, during a change in routine. They might struggle shifting from one activity to another, which then leads to impulsive choices and behaviors like pushing someone or shoving someone or jumping off of the wall or the steps or whatever. Impulsive kiddos might also be emotionally reactive. Impulsivity is often associated with a heightened emotional response to things. They might seem very intense and have emotions and reactions that are quick to escalate, leading to behaviors that demonstrate a difficulty in kind of coming back, right? Those high highs, low lows, big problems, molehills into mountains very, very quickly. They may have poor planning and organization like we talked about before. These executive function struggles come in. When we're trying to differentiate between the impulsive behaviors and actual chosen intentional actions, it comes down to the thought behind the process. Every kiddo is unique, and so the presence of one or more impulsivity signs doesn't necessarily indicate that your kiddo has ADHD or some other kind of neurodivergency that leads to impulsivity. It's important to consider the broader context and think about when those behaviors happen. Is it always in a specific situation? If that's the case, then it may be more intentional. It may be an avoidance behavior. It may be a motivation issue. It may be that your kiddo just doesn't like a specific thing. If it happens kind of across the board, right, it impacts multiple areas in your kid's life, that's when it is more likely to be impulsivity, some kind of attention issue or challenge. And so that's when you want to really think about how you can help your kiddos out and help them with their regulation skills. When it comes to impulsivity, there are some challenges and then there are often misconceptions. So let's talk about some of those challenges first. When our kids are very impulsive, they have trouble making good decisions. Impulsivity can lead to poor decision making because our kiddos might act on immediate desires without considering those long-term consequences. This can impact all different areas of their life, right? It can impact their relationships with their siblings, with you, their parents, with teachers at co-op or other parents of kids in groups, or even their friends and their friends' parents. It can lead to struggles with academics, with their own personal mental health and well-being. It can lead to academic issues, like I said, with regards to their concentration and their focus, their task completion. How many of you out there, and I am raising my hand with you, have kiddos or themselves who don't always follow through on tasks, or it takes a really long time to get through something, longer than it should? They might have trouble staying organized, meeting deadlines. They might have trouble in social situations. Kiddos who struggle with impulsivity might interrupt conversations, disregard social or personal boundaries. They might struggle with turn taking. This can impact their relationships, their ability to integrate into social groups, their ability to make and maintain friendships. It also leads to risk-taking behavior, a higher propensity for engaging in risky behaviors without considering what could happen as a result of it. As our kids get older, this can lead to big, scary things like substance abuse, reckless driving, engaging in dangerous behaviors, leading to potential harm. I remember getting on Trevor when he was 16 and a half, and asking him, like, are you ever going to go get your driver's license? My gosh, like, you could have gotten your permit 6-8 months ago and you could have been practicing driving all this time. Don't you want your driver's license? And I remember distinctly him turning to me and saying, Mom, first of all, I don't really need it. There's nowhere I go without you or a parent of friends or whatever. I always have a ride to wherever I need to go. I don't need to drive right now. And he said, besides, you know how impulsive I am. Do you want me on the road with you? And I was like, that's a really good point. And he stuck by that. He didn't end up getting his license till he was like 18 and a half because he didn't really need it. And he knew he struggled with impulsivity and didn't want to get behind the wheel. And there are still times that I dislike driving with him because I feel that he's still too impulsive, even at 20, and calmed down a lot with 2 years of driving beneath his belt. Kids who struggle with impulsivity can struggle in all areas of their lives. However, there are some misconceptions involved when it comes to impulsivity. There are a lot of people who think that impulsivity is actually just a lack of self-control or willpower. The thing that we need to recognize as parents of neurodivergent kids is that kids who have impulsivity as a result of whatever their neurodivergencies are, they have difficulty regulating these impulses due to underlying neurological and neurobiological factors. This is not just effort or discipline. Now, that said, the issue isn't an excuse to behave willy-nilly. Our kids who struggle with impulse control don't have a carte blanche approval to just do whatever it is they want to do without thinking about the consequences. We still live in a society that has other individuals living in it. And so we need to learn to manage our behaviors when we struggle with impulse control. However, it's important to talk about that with our kids early and often. It's important to say, hey, dude, I know this is hard for you. It's harder for you than it is for your sister who doesn't struggle with impulse control. It doesn't make it any less important that you behave in this specific way than it does for your sister to behave in that way. But I recognize that it's going to be a little bit harder for you to do the right thing in that situation. So how can I help? Talk them through it, help them see that you see them, and let them know that you're there to help them. You understand that it's not a lack of self-control. It is a struggle for them, but you're going to be there to help them. It's also often a misconception that these kiddos are intentionally disrupting situations. This is why these kids get into trouble in school all the time. It's misunderstood as an intentional disruptive behavior. And we need to make sure that we differentiate for our kids between impulsive actions, which occur without much thought, and intentional actions aimed at causing harm or disruption. Again, we need to have that conversation with our kids. Hey, it's going to be harder for you to pay attention in your co-op class this week than it is for some of the others in the class, but you still need to. Your co-op teacher went to a lot of trouble to prepare a great class for you so you could learn the things that you need to learn, and it's still important that you behave in a way that's respectful to your teacher. So make sure that you're staying focused, but then also make sure that the people who are working with your kids know that this is a little bit more difficult for them. Okay, so clearly you know that I love CTC Math. They are sponsoring the podcast this season, so I'm talking about it all season long, but I want to make sure that you know a couple different features. I've talked about how it's great flexibility-wise, but let me tell you a little bit more about that flexibility. First of all, you get, like I said before, unlimited access to all lessons across all grade levels. That means one subscription gives you kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, sixth grade math, basic math, pre-algebra, elementary measurement, elementary geometry, all of those things that kids in middle school might need to review before going on to high school math. It gives you Algebra 1, Algebra 2, geometry, trigonometry, pre-calc, and calculus. It's amazing. You get all of those levels with one subscription. One of the things I love most, though, is a new feature that they've rolled out, all about mastery-based education, meaning they give kids the chance to continue going through a concept until they reach the highest level of difficulty in that particular concept. So if you're using it for a mastery-based approach and you use this feature, every time your kiddo answers a question, the program chooses the next question based on an adaptive algorithm. And what that means is the questions adjust in difficulty based on your kiddo's ability, meaning those kids who are motivated to do more and well in math and really enjoy it can challenge themselves to attempt a wider range of questions, building this solid foundation. It unlocks questions that are more and more challenging with a greater depth for those kiddos who are math-based, math thinkers, and think that they want to get into some kind of math career. And it increases confidence and their enjoyment of math overall for those kids, like I said, who are really mathy. Parents have a better measure of their kiddos' understanding of the lesson. They can identify gaps in their kiddos' knowledge where maybe further work might be needed. And it allows them to facilitate an individualized learning approach to math so your kiddos are truly learning at their own pace. It's amazing. You can check out the description of the mastery-based approach along with a short video explaining it at ctcmath.com/mastery, or you can go over to the show notes for this episode and you can click on the CTC Math link to find out more. Okay, let me know if you have any questions. Feel free to reach out, and let's get back to today's episode. Often our kids are misconstrued as bad children or troublemakers. In fact, I remember my kiddo when he went to kindergarten and first grade feeling like he was always the bad kid, like he was always in trouble because he really struggled with impulse control early on in the classroom setting. And so he was constantly getting yelled at and earning consequences for these bad behaviors. And he wasn't a bad kid, and he wasn't out to make trouble for his teacher. Yes, the behaviors were disruptive, and yes, he needed to be held accountable for the disruptive behaviors because other children have a right to learn in a classroom setting. However, it's important that we don't make these kiddos feel like they're troublemakers and they're bad people and bad kids because of the difficulties that they face. There is a strong misunderstanding in education, in school systems, a misconception that a one-size-fits-all approach to behavioral discipline and consequences in teaching can work for every child. It's why our outside-the-box kids don't fit in a normal classroom and why they struggle so much. It's why, quite frankly, homeschooling is the best option for these kiddos. We get the opportunity to work with our kids in a way that helps them overcome these impulsive challenges and reach the best versions of themselves. So, what kinds of things can we do when it comes to homeschooling our neurodivergent kids? We can establish clear routines for our kids. We can help them see what comes first, second, third, next, after, then, and we can help them maintain a routine or a schedule so they know what to expect, and we eliminate the opportunity to make some of those impulsive choices. A strategy that's very good often for our most impulsive kiddos is to create a visual schedule, to provide structure and predictability, to put the schedule or the routine or the calendar in front of them where they can find it. I'm looking at the wall of my office where I have a color-coded 12-month set of calendars showing me a year at a time. They're whiteboard calendars, and right now they show January through December 2023. But I have them arranged in a 4x3 grid, and I'm just about ready to erase all of January, February, March, and April, which is the top row of my grid, and replace it with January, February, March, and April 2024. So my family can look at a 12-month visual representation of the big things that we have going on in the next calendar year. I rotate that after every 4-month chunk. I add in the next set of months for the next year so we can always see a year at a glance. A visual schedule is a great tool for neurodivergent kiddos. We can also help our kids learn to break tasks into smaller, more manageable steps. This helps them with their focus, and it gives them a greater opportunity for task completion. When we tell our kids to clean our rooms and they are impulsive and distractible and struggle with focus, they get to their rooms and they get overwhelmed from all of that sensory input, and they impulsively start playing a game or making a bigger mess. But when we tell our kids to go up to their room, get all of the dirty clothes and bring it down to the laundry room and then check in, we give them an opportunity to fulfill one task, which gives them a greater chance of following through and completing something, leading to a positive outcome. We can also, when appropriate for our particular kiddos, implement some kind of behavioral management technique, such as a reward system, something to reinforce positive behaviors and self-control. Now, one caveat to this: this doesn't work for all kids. Some kids are not extrinsically motivated. Some kids are very, very intrinsically motivated and need to know why a behavior is important before being able to do it well. Some kids need their intellect appealed to before anything else. That said, some kids react really well to external rewards in order to complete things. Now, before you all come at me with this idea of bribing our kids is a bad thing, I want to tell you from experience that sometimes to get yourself through a negative loop, to break yourself out of it, and to help your kids overcome an area in which they're being stuck again and again and again, external rewards can work well. You don't want to use them all the time. You don't want your kids to only do their schoolwork if they get screen time, or only do a chore if they get a piece of candy afterwards, or only do something for something else. But sometimes we need to give them a reward for the behaviors that they're trying to change when they actively change them. So use this strategy with caution and when you know it's important for your kids and when it works for a specific type of child. Another thing that we can do in our homeschool to help our kids who are impulsive is we can incorporate lots and lots of brain and sensory breaks. We can give them movement exercises. We can give them an outlet to remove the excess energy, which often leads to impulsivity. They can take trampoline breaks or a brain break if they need to get some novelty involved in their day. They can solve a Rubik's Cube or do a logic puzzle or plan a scavenger hunt or complete a scavenger hunt that you've planned or something else. Give them breaks, whether they're brain breaks, movement breaks, sensory breaks, whatever. When you're doing things like this, you're actually working on the next strategy I was going to bring up, which is to teach your kids self-regulation skills. When you show your kids that it is okay to involve some movement in between activities or tasks or assignments, especially when they're starting to feel pent-up emotion or pent-up energy, you're giving them tools. You're teaching them how to regulate themselves. They can regulate their emotions, they can regulate their impulses, they can regulate their energy, and they can do this in all sorts of ways. Deep breathing techniques, movements, brain breaks, drawing, journaling, calming activities, fidgeting tools, all sorts of things. So you want to teach your kids to practice self-regulation techniques. It's also important that you, as the teacher and the facilitator and the model in your homeschool, give clear instructions and visual aids when necessary. You give verbal cues. You support their attention struggles. You support their impulsivity. You give them the scaffolding that they need to build up the ability to complete tasks and do things without being impulsive in the midst of it. When it's necessary, when you reach a point where you're still struggling and you need more outside help, get it. Get the help of a child psychologist, a therapist, an occupational therapist, somebody that can help you with some of the impulsivity controls so that you can begin building a team to help your kiddo and help you help your kiddo. Above all, it's important for parents who are homeschooling neurodivergent kids who can be impulsive to prioritize communication. Validate your kids' attempts at controlling their impulses and regulating their emotions and their feelings. Be a good listener. Empathize with your kids. Help them regulate their emotions and let them know that you're there to encourage them and to help them out and support them in any way necessary. You are exactly who and what they need to learn to regulate their emotions and their impulses. You've got this. You are the perfect parent and the perfect teacher for your impulsive neurodivergent kiddo. I promise you. If you get a chance, I would love to hear about some of the things that you do in your home that helps with impulse control. You can leave a message for me over on the voicemail widget at the show notes for this episode at raisinglifelonglearners.com/podcast. You can shoot me a message through the contact form on the website, both at the podcast show notes or on the contact form on the site. And you can reach out to me on social media. Let me know what kinds of things are working for you. I would love to hear about that. You can also help others who might have kiddos who struggle with impulse control by sharing this episode, by leaving a rating or review over on Apple Podcasts or anywhere that you listen to your podcasts, and forwarding the emails that you get from our newsletter if you're on the newsletter. If not, you can sign up on the website so that others can click through and either sign up to join our email list or to get the podcast as well. All right, we're going to be back next week, same time, same place with another episode. And I am actively seeking guests. I haven't had a guest on the podcast in a long time because it's been very difficult with the way that my kids' schedules have been and our own homeschooling neurodivergent kids. And so I've taken a break from scheduling people to come on the podcast. But I am opening that back up, and I've had a couple great interviews that are coming up soon. And so I want to know from you who else you want to hear on the podcast. If there is a guest that you want to hear from or a guest that you think would be particularly engaging when it comes to homeschooling neurodivergent kiddos, send them my way or send me an email yourself with contact information or a name to reach out to. I get a lot of requests. It's really interesting. When you have a podcast, you get a lot of requests for interviews and guest spots. And the sad thing is I have to delete probably about 90% of them because they're just not right for the podcast. A lot of people see that you have a podcast and just send hundreds and hundreds of emails out to anybody that has a podcast saying that they love what you're doing and they want to get on your podcast. And then they pitch you a completely and totally inappropriate pitch because they're not actually someone who can help your audience. They're someone who wants to get their product out. I had a request in my email box just today about a personal finance advisor who wanted to tell me and my audience all about how to prevent spam and hackers from getting in their email because they thought that it related to a topic they had heard about on my podcast recently. And as we all know, as podcast listeners, that has nothing to do with homeschooling and raising neurodivergent kiddos. And so they obviously hadn't listened to any of the podcast episodes. And that's about 90% of the emails that I get related to it. So I want to hear from you. I want to hear from listeners of this podcast. Who do you want to hear on it? Who do you want me to get on this podcast and chat with about homeschooling and raising neurodivergent kiddos? Let me know. Reach out. I can't wait to hear from you. And I will talk to you soon. Have a great week with your kiddos. Bye for now.